Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. Following various comments and emails asking me to do something in preparation for the upcoming Component 1 exam, I've put something together to try and give a bit of guidance on what we might be able to, what we might expect, and some of the trends and things going on in the papers over the last few years. So over the last 2 years, I've produced revision videos and the things will be easier for those two, to be honest. So in 2022, I produced an advanced information for summer 22 video, links on the screen, and you can look at that. And there was advanced information, so I made a video looking at what was in the advanced information pack. The following year, 2023, I produced a revision video, which was based on the stuff that wasn't in the advanced information and on the exam in 2022. Therefore, it created between them, or they create between them, quite a neat package where it covers like the whole spec, really. So you link this then into the 100 and however many videos there are in the A-level politics bit, and you look at the component 1 ones, and there should be kind of a nice tidy package where I've gone through and I've covered all the different bits of the spec. Now this leads to the question of where are we now? So we've lost kind of a bit of an advantage that we had over the last 2 years. So we did the first of all, these are the bits you told us it could be on, and then secondly, right, now we'll play fill the gaps in terms of what you left out. And I think that worked quite nicely last year, and again it was really nice paper, so it worked quite well. Now, I would emphasize absolutely that the best preparation is always to go through the whole specification, bullet point by bullet point, and this is something that my videos do. Lots of years of experience in teaching and working on these things, and the exam board, when they set questions, they have to justify it, and they do. They'll do grids, like I'm going to show some grids later on in terms of what they've asked questions on where they're going next. But they can use any bullet point. There's not a set sequence it has to be done, and they can ask any bullet point. So if you are checking your knowledge, I would have the specification open. I would go through it section by section, bullet point by bullet point in each section. The stuff on my videos will do it. I would do something like traffic lighting it or something like that, where you go through and go, right, that bit on parties, I'm not so sure about that bit on electoral systems, I've absolutely nailed that, love electoral systems. This bit on the media, right, that's okay. The bits that you're less confident on, go back, do more revision in those areas. Make sure as part of your revision you are doing recall. Now that might be doing things like flashcards, either the ones you made your own or ones that you've bought in. Get people to test you on them, test yourself on them. Do things like knowledge dumps, where you go and without any notes or information with you, just go and write everything you know. So right, I need to do something on that bullet point. Go right, so everything you know on that bullet point. Then get your notes out, get a video on, get your textbook out, whatever it is, and go back and add to that to fill in the gaps. Give it a pause, go do something else, then do it again. So all those are great. Also, there's the old favourite: just go and do loads of past paper questions. Get used to the kind of the technique and stuff on that. Remember, in these papers, you're going to have to do a source question. You get a choice 1 of 2. You're going to have to do a knowledge essay. Again, you get a choice one out of 2, and then you're going to have to do an ideology essay, a 24 marker. And again, you get a choice out of 1 out of 2. They're the core ideologies on this, so there will be 2 out of liberalism, socialism, conservatism there. So that's kind of what you're going to be looking at on the exam paper. So just make sure you've practiced all those. Again, if you want stuff on technique, there are technique videos on my channel as well. Right, so what I'm going to go through in this video comes with a little bit of a health warning. I'm going to talk about the possible gaps. I'm going to talk about the trends. I'm going to show you the things that they like to seemingly go back to endlessly. I do not have any special insider knowledge. As I've said before, they can ask anything relating to any bullet point on the specification. The exam boards deliberately try and make their papers unpredictable. So everything I say in terms of, oh, there's an interesting gap here, might all be completely wrong in terms of that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to ask a question on it. So it all comes with a health warning. This is just me looking at the trends and things over time and going, oh, that's interesting. And that might help you think about some of the stuff that you're looking at. So section 1 is on democracy and participation. We can see here that representative and direct democracy has been asked on in 21 and 23. In 23, they asked about democratic deficit, and in 21, they were asked about something about whether MPs could ignore referendums and manifestos, and that kind of that's all links into the idea of representatives and what their role should be in a representative democracy. They have never asked, as far as I can work out, something I would say is directly on the franchise and the debates around it, and we'll come back to that in more detail in a minute. On pressure groups, think tanks and lobbyists and other things like corporations, then we can, in 1.3, we can see they did ask directly on this in 2019. There has been stuff on pressure groups both in 2020 in relation to rights and in 22 in relation to media. So the one in 2020 also relates to 1.4 on rights. The one in 2022 also relates to the section on media later on. So in rights, you've had rights and pressure groups in 20, and you've had protection of individuals and collective rights in 2022. So there is one big gap in there, which is 1.2. So what is this one? Well, I can see why there's a gap, to be honest, because I mean, I am a history nerd, so this bit's right up my street. But I think if you ask on the first bullet point, it just looks like a history question, doesn't it? So and I think maybe they have to be a little bit careful here, because there will be people doing A-level history and A-level politics, a very good combination, in which they might be looking at reform and the growth of democracy in Britain in huge amounts of depth in a history paper, and then if they got it just asked directly on it in a politics paper, it would be like Christmas. So they could do it. It is a bullet point in the spec. It's very difficult to get lots of modern examples to back it up if you're talking about the 1832 Reform Act, or the voting age dropping to 18 in 1969, but they're all on there. Again, the next one, there are detailed history papers which look at this in an enormous amount of detail. The work of the suffragists and the suffragettes in extending the franchise, again, historically and politically really, really important. Again, they could make links in terms of stuff to do with representation, female representation, and the lack of women in Parliament, I guess. But there's not been a question on that. It doesn't mean that there won't be. But it is, the first two bullet points there are tricky to get, I think, absolutely up-to-date politics questions on, because they are history related. That doesn't mean they couldn't do it. They might relate it to, as I said, something like female representation. Now, the final of the three bullet points in this bit really does, to me, look like an area where there is a gap. So the work of a current movement to extend the franchise. So there are two big ones on this. I think the one that's had the most traction over recent years is the idea of votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, which again I think would make a really, really good question. And another possible one is votes for prisoners. So if you haven't done so already as part of your revision, I would make sure that you can have a decent crack at either of those if they were to come up. As I said, I've done lots of stuff on this bits before. There's a lovely screenshot of the video from 2023 with the bit on the vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. And again, so you go on one side, you got the fact if you're 16, you can have a baby, you can pay tax, you can join the armed forces, give consent to medical treatments, join trade union, get married. But that bit's changed now. So again, it's amazing how these things do shift now, don't they? And so you can argue with there's bits in there, not all of it's still true, but there's bits in there which you can do at 16, 17, so why can't you vote? And again, it's about empowering young people, getting them involved in politics, so they're going to be voting on things that are going to impact on their future. You talk about the fact that we can have 5-year gaps between elections. That doesn't happen very often, but we can. Looks like we might do this time. 16 and 17-year-olds vote in Scottish elections. Being increased political engagement with that group, particularly around the ideas of things like independence, and the growth of online and social media has led to increased political awareness. I mean, and I'm sure you guys are all kind of very good examples of this yourselves, and we see kind of political movements within schools. So there's been, when I wrote this, there was originally there was the stuff on environmental issues. We saw students going on strike. Since then, I mean, there's lots of stuff involving kind of wars and all sorts of stuff that's going on at the moment, which is really piquing interest of students, and they're getting actively involved in protests and stuff like that. On the other side, you can say 16 and 17-year-olds are still legally children. You talk about the low voter turnout in 18 to 24-year-olds, and so you can make this worse. And you can say 16 and 17-year-olds know very little about politics, and before we make any change, what we need to be doing is better education first. And the younger people are more likely to be influenced by things like fake news and extreme politics and some of the worries and problems and stuff that comes out of social media. They might be less discerning there. Again, linking back to the previous point about education and stuff to build it up. It's a debate I do every year with my students when I'm teaching Unit 1. I'm sure that would be very much the same across the board. So it would be a kind of a logical one to turn up. The prisoners one, again, is one that we all tend to do. And it is one that always gets kind of passions on both sides. So it would be, and links in with rights obviously very strongly. So it would be another good possible question. So another one to have a look into. So 1.3 talks about pressure groups and other influences, and again, so there's some codes for some of the videos and things on there. Again, if you can't find, I'll try and make as many links in the video as possible, but it often limits them. So you might just need to go through the playlist and try and find all of these different ones. So the first two bullet points, again, I think have been reasonably well covered. Again, doesn't mean that they could well come up again. Pressure groups are an important bit. Make sure you've done your case studies. So you need to have done some pressure groups relating to rights as well for 1.4, but for 1.3, make sure you have got a couple of really good pressure groups, and you've got loads of detail and examples you can use from. So if you get a pressure groups question, you've got that key stuff for AO1. So do yourself some mind maps, some flashcards, whatever. Choose yourself 2 pressure groups. I would probably do about 3 pressure groups. I'll make sure 2 of them related to rights, so you've got the crossover there. So you've got all of that stuff. Make sure you are prepped on that. The other interesting bit on this, and this is, we have to go back to 2019 since this was asked, is the stuff on collective organisations, groups including think tanks, lobbyists and corporations, and their influences on government and parliament. Was asked in 2019. So we've not had anything directly on think tanks, lobbyists or corporations since. So again, that is something to go and dig your stuff out on and have a look at that in more detail. Get yourself some up-to-date information on the lobbying scandals. There's been plenty of them. Remember, Cameron has been involved in one, which is a really good recent examples. There's all the stuff to do with the impact of the corporations, particularly things like the big social media companies. The stuff to do with how little tax they pay and to suggest they got too much influence. The lobbying one is all my students always just think it's absolute corruption, but remember, lobbyists are people just who can gain a degree of political influence. It can be used for good as well, for negative reasons. It doesn't have to be corruption. It can be important ideas and pressure groups who are trying to do great things, who can get their ideas through the government through lobbyists. It's not as big as it is in the US, but if lobbying firms weren't at all effective, then you might start to question why do they exist? So lobbying is again a thing to make sure you've done spend a bit of extra time and some revision on, just in case. The next bit is section 2 in the spec is really interesting and slightly puzzling, really. So the parties in context bit, we've seen some stuff in 21 on the and whether the electoral system should change because we've now got a multi-party system. If you could argue we had a multi-party system. In 2022, there was a very strange question about pick and mix politics and about party success, and party success comes into 2.4. There was a question back in 2019 on whether only the Labour Party and the Conservative Party matter, and since then there's a big absence on political parties, on either major or minor parties. So this again looks like an area that it's worth spending a bit of time and effort. Again, we've got here the links to videos on the different parties. Just make sure you've got lots of examples. Highlighted the bit in red again. So you need to know how the historical developments have shaped the ideas and current policies on economy, law and order, welfare and foreign affairs for the different political parties. Try and get as up to date as you can. Obviously, as we have not hit the election campaign, and again, I'm working on this stuff, I've been hoping we'd start an election campaign, because they then all produce manifestos which would tell us exactly where they are. Again, if you've been following politics closely, then you'll know where the major bits are of particularly the two main parties. All the stuff with small boats and migration, to the arguments over the economy, the funding of public services, things like that. It's worth going back. You should have some stuff in your notes and details going back to the 2019 manifestos, but obviously we've had multiple changes of leadership and things like that since then. So it's worth looking at the party websites and stuff like that to try and get an idea of exactly where you are with these different bits. And then minor parties as well. I just think it's interesting. You can tell the spec is based on when it was made. So I was first teaching in 2017, so it was written 2015, 2016, I assume. So the Liberal Democrats somehow ended up in the major party bit, where you'd argue maybe they shouldn't be at the moment. But make sure you've got not only Labour, Conservatives and Liberals, but you've got details on two others. I always suggest to my students that you have a good look at the SNP, because of the numbers they've got in Parliament. And then other than that, I would pick from something like the Green Party or Reform to make sure you've got an alternative. Again, examples going backwards a bit in terms of UKIP and Brexit would be absolutely fine as well, because you can show the fairly significant impact they've had. So there's lots and lots of stuff in there. Again, parties are really interesting. I think there's some really good potential questions in there. There has been a lot of instability, particularly changes of leadership in the Conservative Party. So there's lots of stuff on faction and stuff like that. So I thought there's some good questions potentially in there. Right, electoral systems, and as the icon above me suggests, I mean, I love electoral systems. I'm slightly obsessed on electoral systems, but in all of this, we can see that there's stuff almost every time on this section. So I mean, you've got to be ready. You've got to know your first past your post versus your different systems. You've got to know the different systems that are used in the different parts of the UK. So you've got to show how they work. You've got to think about the strengths. You've got to think about the weaknesses. You've got to know about referendums. There's been stuff on referendums both last year and in 2021. Interesting question back in 2021 on opinion polls and their impact on elections and referendums. Obviously, there's been lots and lots of stuff with opinion polls, and they've been talking about that. We had the local elections recently, and people were saying, well, what's the best indicator? Are the opinion polls right? Are the Labour going to end up with this massive majority at the next election? And there's been plenty of time, particularly if we go back to the Brexit referendum, where the opinion polls got it completely wrong. So we've got lots of stuff in here that's being asked on, so there's plenty of good ones to go back and find online and or get from your teachers or wherever and get hold of and practice. So this seems to be a favourite. There doesn't seem to be a pattern. This comes up a lot. Now, the next bit we'll look at is voting behaviour and the media. And the bit that they seem to love more than anything else, and they did take a year off, bless them, is the media. And so you could talk about the media when, in fact, it was in the source in 2019. There's quite a lot of stuff on media and that about elections being stable and predictable. So there was stuff on voting behaviour. In 2020, a source that said that it was asking whether it was age and the media, not class and region, that dictated voting behaviour now. In 2021, they had opinion polls and elections on referendums, and again, it's opinion polls are produced in the media, so that bit is linked into there. And then there was a question directly asking whether the role of media in politics is exaggerated. And then there was whether media or pressure groups had bigger impact in 2022. I mean, I think the one thing that can't be exaggerated is how much they like asking questions on the media, because yeah, there's 1 year missing, and in 1 year it was on twice. So it's on there a lot. Voting behaviour, I love voting behaviour. It looks like they particularly like asking source questions on it. There's not been an essay, so that's an interesting one in that. So voting behaviour, it came up again. Maybe it's time for a straight essay on voting behaviour. The sources were well worth going back and having a look at. The stuff on voting behaviour and age, I think, is particularly interesting with the nice straight line graphs. The kind of, a lot of it is common sense, but then some of the stuff as voting behaviour changes kind of breaks down some of those stuff where you kind of go, oh well, you know, people who live there would vote that way, people who are that class would vote that way. A lot of that started to change, particularly with the breaking down of the Red Wall in 2019. So again, linking into that would be a really good kind of potential essay question that they could go into. But again, voting behaviour in media, there's been lots and lots on it. Right, the ideology bit, this is my favourite bit. I get excited by the ideology bit. If there is any pattern anywhere in the paper, this is probably the only place where there's any real pattern. As we can see, so what seems to happen is they don't go, or haven't as yet, gone 2 years in a row where they've asked on the same two. So you will get an ideology will stay on for 2 years and then it will go away, and they then the one that's been on for 2 will go away and the other one will come back in. Seems to be it. I wouldn't trust the pattern, because if I've spotted the pattern, they'll have spotted the pattern and they'll go, oh, that looks like there's a pattern. We shouldn't have a pattern. People will spot it. So they've all been 2 questions on 2 different ideologies. So there's lots that ask about one of the 4 things. So you've got human nature, society, economy, and state. So some of those turn up a lot. There's not a lot on human nature in there, I would say. And then they tend to also have ones in there somewhere where they are comparing the different strands. So it might be that the one nation conservatives versus the new right. It might be the third way versus other types of socialism. It might be modern and classical liberalism being compared. So there's lots of society stuff in there. There's a lot of state stuff in there. There's a little bit of economy, and then there's the breakup of the strands. There is a big human nature bit missing on there. I always recommend to my students that you revise all 3 ideologies, just to be sure, because 2 of them are going to turn up. But if you only do 2, then one of the ones you do might not come up, and the other one might have an absolutely stinking nasty question on it, in which case you're in a bit of a difficult position. But depending on how you're going time-wise, this might be an area where you think you can make a call and go, right, socialism has been on for the last 2 years. Conservatism wasn't on last year. So that might be, if that was the pattern, then that would suggest liberalism and conservatism. But again, I'd be very, very cautious with that, because, as I said, if I can spot the pattern, and I'm sure some other people spotted the pattern, then I'm sure the exam board is aware of it and maybe thinking about changing it. Right, as I said, I had lots of emails and comments and stuff asking for something like this. It all comes with a health warning. I just thought might be to meet people's requests. I try and have a bit of a go at it and just look at the past papers. Best of luck to everybody with your revision. Please do make full use of the channel. Go through the component 1 playlist, through the A-level playlist. Remember, technique is really important as well. Think about your timings. Get your timings right. That will have a massive impact on your final mark. Keep on revising. Good luck, everybody.